The skies above Pakistan darkened without warning, a heavy silence pressing over cities and villages alike. Clouds gathered like an army preparing for war, rolling across the horizon with a menacing weight. In the north, rivers churned violently, their currents swelling with a force too powerful to ignore. The sound of rushing water echoed against the mountains, a grim reminder that something catastrophic was on the way. Across television screens, breaking news banners screamed in red, "Flood alert, next 36 hours critical." Anchors delivered the warnings with urgent voices, their words cutting through households already bracing for another sleepless night. Social media feeds filled with frantic videos of rising streams, submerged roads, and terrified families hauling belongings to higher ground. In towns like Peshawar and Mardan, the fear was no longer distant, it was at the doorstep. Pakistan has just 36 hours before floodwaters strike with deadly force. The chilling line echoed through radios, news apps, and conversations in marketplaces. Parents clutched their children tighter, farmers rushed to secure their fields, and shopkeepers hurried to protect what little they had. Every minute mattered now, and every second seemed to tick louder than the last. This was not the first time the nation faced such a trial. Memories of 2010 and 2022 lingered like scars, when entire villages disappeared overnight, when cries for help drowned beneath the roar of the rivers. The people knew what these warnings meant. They knew the danger wasn't abstract, it was real, and it was coming. But this time, the sense of urgency was sharper, more haunting. Experts warned that the monsoon rains had grown heavier, more unpredictable. Infrastructure strained under years of neglect, while politicians traded blame instead of solutions. The fate of millions now hung in a fragile balance, suspended between the wrath of nature and the weakness of human preparation. In the markets, whispers rose. Would the government act in time? In the villages, elders shook their heads. Could anyone stop what was coming? And across the nation, hearts pounded with the same unspoken question: who will survive the storm? But this is only the beginning. What lies ahead could rival the nation's worst disasters. From the rugged mountains of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to the fertile plains of Punjab, the warnings now stretch like a shadow across the nation. Entire regions, Peshawar, Swat, Charsadda, Mardan, Lahore, Faisalabad, Multan, are being marked on maps with flashing red alerts. Rivers that once gave life to crops and villages are now being watched like ticking bombs, their swelling currents threatening to burst through fragile embankments at any moment. Millions of lives hang in uncertainty, their safety tied to a clock that is running out. Pakistan's geography makes it especially vulnerable. The mighty Indus Basin, fed by countless tributaries from the north, becomes both lifeline and threat when monsoon rains arrive with abnormal force. In KPK, narrow valleys funnel rainwater into rivers that rise with terrifying speed, sweeping away bridges, homes, and roads in minutes. As the waters travel south into Punjab, they spread wider, threatening the fields that feed not only Pakistan but millions across the world who depend on its wheat and rice exports. This is not just a local crisis, it is a storm with the power to shake global food security. The memories of 2010 are not distant history, they are living nightmares. That year, nearly one-fifth of Pakistan were submerged. More than 20 million people were displaced, entire districts wiped out. 12 years later, in 2022, the country faced yet another catastrophe. Villages vanished, livestock drowned, families stranded on rooftops waving for help that came too late. Those disasters scarred a generation, and now, with the threat looming again, the fear is raw and immediate. What makes this moment even more dire is not just the rain, it is the fragility of human preparation. Pakistan's drainage systems are clogged and outdated, dams and barrages weakened by decades of neglect, and city planning almost non-existent. Every downpour exposes the cracks in governance, the price of corruption, and the arrogance of leaders who ignored scientists' warnings. The people know it. They've seen this script before, and they know how it ends if nothing changes. International observers are already alarmed. The United Nations has raised early warnings, aid organizations are moving into position, and economists whisper about ripple effects. Higher global food prices, disrupted supply chains, more instability in a region already fragile. What begins as water spilling into a Pakistani village may end as a rise in bread costs in distant cities thousands of miles away. And yet, for those standing knee-deep in muddy water, the crisis is painfully personal. It is the farmer watching his wheat fields sink beneath relentless rain. It is the mother clutching her child as she flees a crumbling riverbank. It is the young student, books ruined, staring at a home that no longer exists. Each face is a reminder that statistics never capture the true weight of a disaster. This is why the next 36 hours are not just about rain, they are about survival, dignity, and resilience. The nation is at a tipping point, and the choices made now will determine whether Pakistan faces another cycle of grief or breaks free from it. And as the rain clouds thicken, one question grips the nation: who will be left standing when the waters rise? The enemy in this unfolding tragedy is not just the storm clouds gathering over Pakistan. It is something older, more insidious, and far more dangerous because it comes from within. The true villain is arrogance, negligence, and the political corruption that has shadowed the nation for decades. Floods may be natural, but the disasters they become are man-made. Warnings have come year after year, delivered by meteorologists, climate scientists, and international organizations. They have spoken in reports, in conferences, in urgent letters addressed to officials. Strengthen the drainage systems. Reinforce the barrages. Invest in early warning networks. Yet time after time, these warnings were shelved, dismissed as exaggerations, or twisted into political talking points. Leaders assured the people that everything was under control, even as the cracks in the system grew wider and more dangerous. In the cities, poor drainage has turned heavy rains into instant chaos. Lahore, Pakistan's cultural heart, becomes a waterlogged maze every monsoon. Karachi, the economic engine of the country, has seen its streets transformed into rivers where cars float like broken toys. Local governments promise improvement, but every season the cycle repeats. Clogged sores, overflowing drains, powerless citizens wading through knee-deep filth. Then there are the dams and barrages, once celebrated as symbols of progress. Many were built decades ago, when the population was smaller and the climate less volatile. Today, they groan under the pressure of rising waters, their walls fragile against the fury of swollen rivers. Engineers have pleaded for maintenance and upgrades, but funding often disappears into bureaucratic black holes or is siphoned off by corruption. In the end, the structures meant to protect communities stand as brittle monuments to negligence. And when the waters finally break through, the political theater begins. Leaders rush to microphones, declaring unprecedented rains, calling the floods acts of God, absolving themselves of responsibility. Opposition parties seize the moment to blame those in power, while ruling parties counter with their own accusations. Television screens fill with shouting politicians, while outside, families scramble to save what little remains of their homes. The people do not hear solutions, they hear excuses. And excuses do not stop the floods. Perhaps the most painful truth is that Pakistan has lived this cycle before. In 2010, entire districts drowned while leaders argued over who failed first. In 2022, as 30 million people were displaced, officials appeared in photo ops handing out token relief packages, their smiles staged against a backdrop of despair. The arrogance of power has always come at the expense of the powerless. Every time disaster strikes, billions in aid pour in from abroad. International donors, humanitarian organizations, and concerned nations step forward, hoping to help. But too often, those funds vanish into shadowy accounts, mismanaged or outright stolen before they reach the villages that need them most. What is left is resentment, a people abandoned by those sworn to protect them, betrayed not by nature, but by governance. This is the antagonist of Pakistan's story, the corruption that eats away at resilience, the negligence that magnifies every storm, the arrogance that refuses to listen until it is too late. It is not a villain with a face, but a system that allows disaster to repeat itself like a curse. And it is this system that has left Pakistan vulnerable once again, staring down another calamity with defenses as fragile as paper. But while leaders argued, one group of silent heroes had already begun preparing. Every story of survival needs its heroes. In Pakistan's battle against the coming flood, they are not found in marble halls of government or behind polished podiums. They live in the fields, in the villages, in the narrow alleyways of crowded cities. They are the ones who prepare not for applause or power, but for the simple duty of saving lives when everything else collapses. Take the story of Gul Khan, a farmer in Charsadda. For weeks, he had watched the skies darken and the rivers swell, the memories of past floods clawing at his mind. He knew he could not save his entire crop, but he could not abandon his cattle, his only source of livelihood. While politicians traded accusations on television, Gul built makeshift rafts from bamboo and empty oil drums. With the help of his sons, he prepared to ferry his animals to higher ground. His neighbors shook their heads, saying it was hopeless. But Gul's resolve was stronger than the storm. For him, survival was not about statistics or politics. It was about fighting for the life he had built with his bare hands. In a different corner of the country, Aisha, a 20-year-old medical student in Malton, gathered her classmates as warnings of heavy rains grew louder. Their university had no official instructions, but Aisha knew what was coming. She and her peers pooled their money, bought medical kits, and began training themselves in basic emergency care. When people scoffed, she responded with determination, "If the government cannot reach the villages in time, then we must." Her spirit sparked others. Soon, dozens of students volunteered, ready to carry stretchers, disinfect wounds, and deliver medicine where no ambulance could go. There was also the Fishermen's Collective in Thatta, men who had grown up reading the waters like scripture. Long before the official rescue boat stirred, they had begun fixing their wooden crafts, reinforcing them with ropes and barrels. Their wives stitched extra blankets, their children prepared food parcels. When reporters asked why they were doing this without pay, one old fisherman simply replied, "Because when the water rises, it takes us all. If we don't pull each other out, no one will." NGOs, too, moved quietly while the cameras focused elsewhere. Small organizations, often dismissed as irrelevant, began stockpiling dry rations, arranging boats, and mapping vulnerable villages. Volunteers on motorbikes traced routes to ensure relief could pass through blocked roads. They created WhatsApp groups where villagers could send SOS messages with their locations. The government may have lacked coordination, but these grassroots networks pulsed with life, connecting communities like veins carrying blood to every part of a fragile body. And then there were the stories that never made headlines. A schoolteacher in Swat using his classroom as a storage point for rescued families. A taxi driver in Lahore offering free rides to anyone trying to move relatives out of low-lying areas. A group of children forming a chain with rope to help an elderly woman cross a flooded street. These small acts, invisible to the powerful, were in truth the backbone of survival. Together, these ordinary citizens formed an unspoken alliance. They were the lifeline of Pakistan, the ones who refused to wait for help that might never arrive. Their strength was not drawn from authority, but from empathy. They knew the pain of their neighbors, the fear of losing everything, and the weight of being forgotten. And so they acted, not with speeches, but with their hands, their courage, and their hearts. It is easy to look at disasters and see only despair. But within Pakistan, in the hours before the storm, there was also hope. Hope carried by the young, the poor, the unseen. The resilience of these heroes is what turned tragedy into resistance, chaos into solidarity. Their stories remind us that the true measure of a nation is not written by its leaders, but by its people. While officials debated budgets and blame, farmers tied ropes to rooftops, students sterilized medical tools, and fishermen repaired oars. Every action, no matter how small, was a declaration: we will not surrender to the flood. And when the storm hit, it wasn't the officials who stood tall, it was them. The first wave struck quietly, almost deceptively. In the northern valleys of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, villagers awoke to the sound of rain that had not stopped for days. But soon, the trickle of streams became the roar of rivers. The Swat River swelled like a beast unchained, churning brown with silt and fury, devouring farmland, swallowing homes. By afternoon, entire neighborhoods were chest-deep in water. Families scrambled to rooftops, clutching children in one hand and the Quran in the other, praying the currents would spare them. As the flood rolled southward, the scenes grew more desperate. Roads dissolved into rivers. Bridges buckled under the relentless force, cutting off lifelines between villages. In Nowshera, a father tied empty plastic containers around his children's waists, hoping they would float if swept away. In Mardan, rescue calls rang unanswered as official teams struggled to assemble, their trucks delayed by washed-out highways. The storm did not wait for bureaucracy to act, it was already rewriting the map of the north. By the time the waters reached Punjab's borders, tension gripped the nation. Cities like Layar and Rajanpur braced for impact as swollen rivers surged toward them. Farmers abandoned fields of wheat and cotton, their year's labor drowned in hours. Mothers carried infants on their shoulders, wading through waist-high water in search of dry land. The flood was merciless, tearing through the poorest first, the ones who had the least to lose, and yet lost everything. The government's response, when it finally arrived, was scattershot and sluggish. Announcements blared from radios, but shelters were unprepared. Relief camps lacked tents, food, and medicine. Politicians appeared for photo opportunities, promising swift action, then vanished as quickly as they had come. In the vacuum, the people did what they had always done: they saved each other. Fishermen turned their boats into lifelines, navigating drowned streets to reach stranded families. Students formed human chains to pull the elderly across collapsing bridges. In Peshawar, a shopkeeper opened his entire store of rice and flour to the displaced, saying, "Food can be replaced, lives cannot." Strangers carried strangers, neighbors fed neighbors. It was humanity against catastrophe, improvisation against neglect. The drama intensified as rumors spread, dams on the verge of bursting, new rain systems forming in the west. Each hour brought new uncertainty. The flood was no longer just water, it was fear itself, surging through conversations, weighing on every heartbeat. The people were living inside a countdown, unsure if the next surge would erase the very ground beneath them. And yet, amid the devastation, resilience burned like a stubborn flame. Children laughed as they floated on makeshift rafts of broken doors. Women sang old folk songs to keep spirits alive in crowded shelters. Every act of courage was a defiance of the disaster, a refusal to let despair have the final word. Still, the danger grew. Satellite images showed a wall of storm clouds pressing southward, heavier than anything yet seen. Experts warned that what had already submerged entire districts was only the beginning. As darkness fell, Pakistan braced itself, not knowing if dawn would reveal survival or further ruin. Then came the breaking point, the moment the nation held its breath. The floodwaters did not relent. By the second night, northern Pakistan was a battlefield between nature's fury and human willpower. Roads were gone, communication lines snapped, and electricity grids lay submerged. But where the state faltered, the people rose, not with weapons or politics, but with something far more powerful: solidarity. In the submerged alleys of Charsadda, villagers formed human chains, waist-deep in raging water, locking arms to guide children and elders to safety. One man slipped, nearly dragged into the torrent, but the grip of his neighbor yanked him back. Their faces strained with fear, yet not one let go. The flood was strong, but their bond was stronger. In Nowshera, a farmer who had lost all his crops tied ropes around his cattle, leading them across swirling currents to higher ground. He knew the animals were his livelihood, but when he reached the end of the rope, he found something great awaiting: children clinging to trees, stranded. He tied the rope around their small bodies, one by one, and pulled them back. His farm was gone, his future uncertain, yet in that moment, saving lives became his harvest. Rescue workers, under-equipped and exhausted, became legends overnight. With little more than inflatable boats and headlamps, they navigated drowning streets, knocking on rooftops, urging families to climb down. In one case, a volunteer plunged repeatedly into chest-deep waters to carry out an elderly couple, while onlookers cheered with tears. His strength seemed impossible, but desperation has always been humanity's hidden reservoir. And then came the voice of the people amplified through technology. Mobile signals were fragile, but wherever a bar appeared, messages flew like arrows. A mother in Mardan sent a shaky video plea: "We are trapped on the roof. My baby is hungry. Please, someone hear us." Within hours, her video was shared thousands of times, retweeted by journalists, amplified by diaspora communities across the globe. Social media became a lifeline, turning private cries into collective mobilization. Aid workers rerouted missions based on viral pins and geotagged coordinates. For every image of destruction, another emerged of defiance. A teenage boy in Swabi tied empty jerrycans to his back, swam into swirling water, and ferried medicine to a stranded family. A group of women in Punjab transformed their sewing machines into tools of resistance, stitching blankets late into the night for displaced neighbors. Mosques, temples, and churches alike threw open their doors, becoming shelters where labels of caste, class, and sect dissolved in the face of survival. Even humor, fragile and fleeting, became a weapon. In Rajanpur, young men stranded on a rooftop unfurled a handmade sign reading, "Wi-Fi still works, send biryani." The photo went viral, sparking laughter in a moment otherwise heavy with despair. That laughter was not trivial. It was proof that the flood could not drown the human spirit. Courage spread like wildfire. In Karachi, hundreds of kilometers away from the worst-hit zones, university students organized donation drives, collecting food, medicine, and clothes. Truck convoys rumbled northward, carrying not just supplies, but hope. In London, Toronto, and Dubai, Pakistani diaspora rallied on social media, raising funds and awareness. Strangers from continents away felt bound to the same fight, sending messages of solidarity, proving that while water had broken borders of land, unity was breaking borders of distance. Yet what made these acts so powerful was not their scale, but their intimacy. One child carried another on his back. One fisherman lent his boat to a rescue team he had never met. One teacher led her class through flooded streets, singing so they would not panic. The enemy was not just the flood, it was despair. And in every corner of the disaster zone, Pakistanis discovered that despair could be beaten back by courage, by kindness, by stubborn faith in one another. News cameras caught glimpses, but the truest stories unfolded in the shadows. A young doctor performing checkups under candlelight in a relief tent, a grandmother sharing her last piece of bread with a stranger, volunteers digging graves with bare hands when time ran out. Each act was small, but together, they created an unshakable counterattack against helplessness. By the third day, a pattern emerged. The water would rise, but so would the people. For every village submerged, another network of rescuers emerged. For every dam that threatened collapse, communities braced together, filling sandbags, refusing to surrender. The headlines spoke of devastation, but on the ground, a second story was writing itself, one of resilience so fierce it bordered on rebellion. The true heroes of this battle did not wear uniforms or sit in offices. They were barefoot, soaked, shivering, but unyielding. They were children who carried water bottles to relief camps. They were mothers who cooked massive pots of lentils for the displaced. They were volunteers who drove hours into danger zones with no assurance of coming back. Every act of defiance against the flood was a declaration: we will not be broken. And then, the world began to notice. Viral images of villagers linking hands to rescue children, of rescue workers diving headfirst into roaring waters, of relief convoys braving submerged roads, these traveled beyond Pakistan's borders. Hashtags trended globally. Donations poured in from strangers who would never meet the faces they were saving. The story of Pakistan was no longer confined to Pakistan. It had become a shared narrative, a universal lesson in human resilience. Still, the flood raged on. Waters pressed further south, and predictions grew darker. Yet something had shifted. The people had found their voice, their weapon, their counterattack, not against nature, but against the hopelessness that threatened to drown them. And as images went viral across the world, Pakistan's struggle became everyone's story. The smoke had barely cleared from Sana'a when the first confirmation appeared. A somber message, buried in the rhetoric of defiance, carried words the world had been waiting for. Houthi Prime Minister Ahmed Ghaib al-Rahawi was dead. What had started as speculation, whispers, and unverified claims now became fact. The heart of the Houthi government had been struck, and the confirmation rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Social media ignited instantly. Within minutes, hashtags like #SanaStrike, #HouthIsHit, and #RahawiDead were trending across platforms. On TikTok and Instagram, short clips of the explosion, shaky, grainy footage taken by ordinary Yemenis, circulated with millions of views. Memes flooded Twitter, edited images of a burning cabinet table, captions mocking Houthi propaganda slogans. Some users hailed it as justice served. Others mourned it as a dark day for Yemen. The digital battlefield was almost as fierce as the one in the skies. Across the Arab world, reactions were divided. In Riyadh, satellite channels broadcast the story with quiet satisfaction, subtly framing it as a blow against Iran's influence. In Cairo, analysts debated the long-term impact, warning that Yemen might spiral further into chaos. In Baghdad and Beirut, commentators sympathetic to the Houthis framed the strike as an assassination, accusing Israel of pushing the region toward catastrophe. But nowhere was the outrage louder than in Tehran. Iranian state television condemned the attack as an act of terrorism, vowing that the resistance will not forget. In Israel, the mood was starkly different. Supporters hailed the strike as one of the most successful operations in years. Newspapers ran bold headlines: "Cabinet gone in one night." "No safe haven for terrorists." Talk shows praised the intelligence community, the pilots, the precision of the operation. On social media, Israelis posted celebratory messages, some even sharing clips of fireworks displays with captions like, "This is what justice looks like." But amid the jubilation and outrage, the world's analysts urged caution. Military experts on CNN and Al Jazeera spoke of the Red Sea flashpoint, warning that the Houthis, even leaderless, still had the capability to launch drones and missiles at shipping lanes, oil infrastructure, or even Israeli territory itself. European think tanks released urgent reports, warning that escalation could choke one of the world's most vital trade arteries. Diplomats in Washington and Brussels whispered about regional war. Even outside policy circles, the strike dominated global conversation. Late-night hosts in New York cracked grim jokes. Israel just RSVP'd the entire Houthi cabinet to a meeting in the afterlife. Influencers on YouTube uploaded breakdown videos with titles like "Did Israel just change the Middle East forever?" Hashtags morphed into slogans. #Vengeance or Victory and #Middle East on Edge. The story wasn't just news anymore. It was culture, commentary, entertainment, fear, and speculation all at once. In Sana'a, however, there was nothing entertaining about the aftermath. Families searched hospitals for missing relatives. Streets remained shrouded in smoke. The shock of the strike gave way to unease, as residents wondered what would come next. Some whispered prayers of relief that a government they despised was gone. Others trembled at the thought of retaliation, knowing that vengeance, when it came, would be indiscriminate. The Arab press filled with images of mourning, portraits of Rahawi draped in black ribbons, footage of Houthi supporters marching in funerals, fists raised in defiance. The message was clear: the movement would not collapse. Instead, it would rise again, fueled by martyrdom. Yet beneath the chants and slogans, uncertainty lingered. Without its leadership, could the Houthis truly hold power? Or would splinter factions tear them apart from within? Around the globe, governments scrambled to respond. The United Nations issued a cautious statement urging restraint on all sides. Washington released a carefully worded message praising Israel's right to defend itself, while urging de-escalation. Moscow, Beijing, and Ankara each condemned the strike, framing it as destabilizing. Diplomats rushed behind the scenes, fearing that one night's success could unravel into months of conflict. The world held its breath. Everyone sensed that this was more than just another battle in a distant war. It was a trigger, a spark, a moment that could redraw alliances, reopen wars thought buried, and destabilize an entire region. And then came the vow. From the heart of Sana'a, through clenched teeth and raised fists, the Houthis broadcast a promise to the world: vengeance. Their leaders declared that Israel would pay a price in blood, that the Red Sea would burn with fire, that the strike would not be the end of the Houthis but the beginning of a storm. The promise was clear, chilling, and open-ended. A vow that hung over the region like a shadow. Because history had shifted. And the question now was not whether the Houthis could strike back, but when and how far it would go. The dust of Sana'a still hung heavy in the air when the world began to search for meaning. Headlines, hashtags, and declarations had captured the drama of the strike, but beyond the smoke and ruins, a deeper truth emerged. This was never just about the death of a man, or the obliteration of a cabinet. It was about the forces that drive nations into conflict: power, arrogance, fear, and the endless cycle of retaliation. The Israeli strike proved something both terrifying and undeniable: leadership is fragile. In a single night, years of authority and influence collapsed into rubble. The Houthis, once so confident in their survival, learned that no bunker is truly safe. Israel, flexing its military precision, reminded the world that when it chooses to act, it can reshape the battlefield instantly. And yet, in this display of dominance, an old truth whispered back: power can kill, but it cannot guarantee peace. For ordinary Yemenis, this truth has been lived for years. Families displaced, children orphaned, futures stolen. To them, the death of a prime minister changes little. The bombs still fall, the hunger still spreads, and the hope of peace still feels like a mirage. Their suffering is the silent lesson of this war. While leaders gamble with vengeance, it is always the innocent who pay the heaviest price. Across the region, people asked themselves what this moment meant. Supporters hailed it as justice. Detractors condemned it as tyranny. But beneath the noise, the moral lesson cut sharper than the blast of any missile: wealth without dignity is slavery. Power without justice is corruption. For too long, nations have sought power for its own sake, hoarding weapons, funding proxies, striking rivals. Yet without justice, without respect for human life, this pursuit of power corrodes from within. The Houthis believed their defiance made them untouchable. Israel believed its strike would cement its dominance. Both reveal the same truth: arrogance blinds leaders to their own fragility. Thrones built on violence sit on sand, not stone. In the deserts of Yemen and the skies over Israel, history shows again and again that no victory is final, no regime is permanent, no power is absolute. And what of vengeance? The Houthis' vow to retaliate may ignite another round of bloodshed. But vengeance, history teaches, never heals. It only multiplies grief, widens wounds, and drags nations deeper into the abyss. The missiles that roar from one side summon drones from the other. Each retaliation promises justice, but delivers only new funerals. This is the cycle that has kept the Middle East in turmoil for generations, a cycle that only courage, not firepower, can break. Yet, even amid the tragedy, there is a lesson of resilience. Ordinary people, Yemeni families praying under shattered roofs, Israeli civilians bracing against rocket sirens, remind us that survival is also a form of resistance. Their quiet perseverance speaks louder than the rhetoric of leaders. They embody the hope that someday, dignity and peace might prevail over arrogance and war. The Israeli strike on the Houthi leadership will be remembered as a turning point. But history will not only judge the strike itself. It will judge what followed, whether the region spiraled into fire, or whether leaders finally recognized the futility of endless revenge. The choice remains unwritten, waiting in the hands of those who govern and those who resist. And so, the story ends where it began, not with the roar of jets or the collapse of buildings, but with a question of meaning. What does power achieve if it cannot bring justice? What is victory worth if it only breeds another war? In the deserts of Yemen and the skies over Israel, history is being written. Written in smoke and fire, yes, but also in lessons older than empires. Lessons that remind us, in war, no throne is permanent, and no power is absolute.